What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Well, the MLB Hall of Fame ballot just dropped, so let's discuss the chances of some former Arizona Diamondbacks and maybe a couple of Sun Devils to make it to the Hall of Fame in 2025.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, Millard.Thomas123 for the personal on Insta, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. On today's show, we're going to discuss the MLB Hall of Fame ballot. Dudes with Arizona ties, some former D-backs, some former Sun Devils are on the ballot, newbies who are trying to be one and dones, and the veterans who are still trying to make it. We'll discuss all that on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And let's discuss the MLB Hall of Fame ballot. And let's start with guys with ties to either the D-backs or even ASU. I want to talk about my Arizona ties because there's two newbies on the ballot who did play for the D-backs back in the day. First is former closer for Arizona, Fernando Rodney. First time on the ballot now that he's eligible, three-time All-Star. 2019 World Series champion, 327 saves, led the league in saves in 2014 with the Seattle Mariners. Rodney had himself a very good career, 3.8 ERA. I like Fernando Rodney a lot, averaged 23 saves per season over his 17-year career, and I do think he was one of the better relievers when he was right. But the issue with Fernando Rodney, he did have an up and down nature to his game. You look at some seasons and he was electric, like that season with the Mariners, 2.85 ERA, 48 saves. 2012 with the Rays, he was 0.6 ERA with 48 saves as well. But there's also a bunch of seasons where he has ERAs north of 4. And because of that lack of consistency for Fernando Rodney, despite him being a former D-back and being solid in Arizona, right? 2017, 39 saves, like that's a very big number, but he also had a 4.23 ERA. And so Fernando Rodney definitely had a nice cup of coffee in Arizona. But when I look at his career, when I look at Fernando Rodney's totality in his career, do I see a Hall of Fame reliever, a Hall of Fame closer? Probably not, because there's a closer on this ballot whose numbers crush Fernando Rodney, and he is entering the final year of eligibility. We'll discuss him later on the podcast. But if guys like that as closers and relievers can't make it to the Hall of Fame, a guy like Fernando Rodney, who is 1 year elite, 1 season average, I don't think that's Hall of Fame worthy. 1.373 whip for his career, 4.5 walks per 9. Like, those numbers are just not elite enough. Yes, he was a good strikeout pitcher. Yes, he had some monster save seasons, but Fernando Rodney, I think he was a very good closer, but I don't ever think he was elite for a long enough period of stretch. And so he is not on my Hall of Fame ballot for 2025 or for the next 10 years. I think he's probably a one and done off the ballot. Same with this other former D-back. I also don't think he'll get enough votes to stay on the ballot past this year, but I do like him. Adam Jones, 5-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove award winner and Silver Slugger. I do think the best case for him to make it to the Hall of Fame is his defense, because he was a very stout defender in his prime, but he's another guy. You look at his career, you look at like his peak, and 2 seasons with an OPS above 800. He was consistently around 25 to 33 home runs, like for a 6-7 year period. But I think you're just one of those very good players, like a perfect number 3, number 4 guy in your lineup. Like if you have Adam Jones, like if he was the D-backs like 3rd or 4th best player in his prime, like yeah, if we had prime Adam Jones instead of Lourdes Gurriel, like I think it would raise the ceiling a little bit of this D-back squad. But I don't think Adam Jones and Lourdes Gurriel are that far apart. Yes, I think Jones is an upgrade over Lourdes Gurriel, but I do think they're still playing in the same league. And because of that, Lourdes Gurriel is not going to be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, everyone at least gets to be on the ballot, but he will not be in the Hall of Fame. Adam Jones, I loved him in his prime. He was always around 30 home runs, around 90 RBIs, playing really good defense, always a really good offensive player, played a ton of games, always around like a 4 WAR. But Adam Jones, again, when I think about the ceiling, that's what it is when it comes to the Hall of Fame a lot. Were you like one of the best players at your position for like a 7-year stretch? Like that's basically how you make the Hall of Fame. Were you one of the 3 best players at your position for like 7 years, 8 years? Like that's how you make it to the Hall of Fame. And Adam Jones, unfortunately, just was not. He basically only peaked for 70 years, was never considered one of the best players during that time. So sadly, no Hall of Fame for Adam Jones, and I think he's going to be a one and done. And these next 2 players, not D-backs, but Sun Devils, and I think they are very, very interesting. Dustin Pedroia, I think, is one of the most interesting test cases we've seen in a while on this Hall of Fame ballot. I don't think he'll make it. I think he'll get enough votes to at least pass the first round, but the reason he's so interesting is because it's more sad than anything when looking at Dustin Pedroia, because I think in 2012, maybe in 2013, last All-Star appearance for Dustin Pedroia, put up a 6.1 WAR according to Baseball Reference, a 301 average that year. He was an All-Star, like I said, finished 7th in MVP voting, and he won the World Series with the Boston Red Sox in 2013. And then basically every year after that, he just had a really hard time staying healthy and was never able to recapture like what he found prior to 2013. Like he still had some good seasons. Like he still had a 291 average in 2015. He played 154 games in 2016 with a 318 average and an 825 OPS. So he still had some good seasons after 2013, but it was also mixed in with a lot of injuries, and those last couple of years of Dustin Pedroia's career just were terrible because of the injuries. And so when you really look at his career post 2013, it's more sad than anything. His career was kind of wrapped up at that point. Like he still had a good 2016, still had a good 2015 season as well. But the injuries really zapped so much of his athleticism, zapped so much of like his just overall day-to-day ability and his prowess at times. And Dustin Pedroia, I think in 2013, coming off the World Series, it felt like he was a lock to be a Hall of Famer in his career because he had the World Series. He had 2 World Series. He had a Silver Slugger. He had an MVP. He had a Rookie of the Year. He had multiple Gold Gloves, multiple All-Star teams. Like all that, uh, he had all that until 2013 at 29 years of age. Like he had all of that. And then after 2013, his career just kind of spirals out of control due to injury. And so this was a guy who I think was on pace to be a lock for the Hall of Fame. And I think, unfortunately, he will not make it, at least not in 2025. I don't think he'll ever make it. Then Ian Kinsler, another former Sun Devil, who I also think is very interesting, actually drafted by the D-backs twice before going back to school before eventually getting drafted by the Texas Rangers. D-backs tried their best to get Ian Kinsler. And Kinsler, another guy, like when he was right in his prime, when he first came in those first few years, like I thought Ian Kinsler was like one of the nastiest second basemen in the sport because he was consistently like a 30-30 guy like every year and like a good OPS and everything. But you really dive into the numbers on Baseball Reference, and again, like post the age of 30, like he really wasn't the same guy. The power dipped in a major way. Like the slugging just didn't seem to be there after the age of 30. He was such a power hitting second baseman, and then as he aged, the power wasn't there. Of course, the speed started to dwindle as well, and he could still hit for contact, but overall as an offensive player, you just weren't as scared of Ian Kinsler post the age of 30. And like a lot of these guys, they had really good peaks, really good careers, maybe 4 or 5 year stretches where you felt great about them, but maybe it's the injuries with the Dustin Pedroia. Maybe it's not like the peak arc like a Fernando Rodney or Adam Jones, where you feel like you just didn't hit that level of ceiling that I need for a long enough period. And because of that, Ian Kinsler, I think, is the same way. All these guys were very good for short periods of time, but I don't think they had enough of a peak for a long enough time for me to vote them into my Hall of Fame. So I think those four guys with Arizona ties are going to be out of the Hall of Fame for the rest of their career. Now we'll discuss newbies on the ballot in segment number 2. If you want to bet, I think you can make this bet. I'm not sure, but if you want to wager on any of these guys of who you think is going to make it to the MLB Hall of Fame, then the best place that will have this wager will, of course, be FanDuel, because get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. When I see the Phoenix Suns are playing, give me Devin Booker over 25 points. Give me the Phoenix Suns money line, and give me Tyus Jones over on assists. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. And if you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss the newbies on the ballot and who we think could be one and done, either one and done off the ballot or maybe one and done in the MLB Hall of Fame, because there are a couple guys who I think should be locks for one and done in terms of first time on the ballot, put them in the Hall of Fame, if not unanimously, because there's a guy on the ballot this year, and if he does not get 100% of the votes, the one person or however many people that don't vote for him this year should have their vote stripped. And I'm talking about Ichiro Suzuki, who has 3,000 hits in his just major league career. We're not even counting Japan. We're not counting his 311 average in America. We know Ichiro Suzuki is one of the greatest baseball players of all time, arguably the greatest pure hitter in Major League Baseball history. If not, you look at his baseball reference, you see the amount of hits on the page, you see the amount of steals on the page. Ichiro is a stud, and he should definitely be in the Hall of Fame for what he did from age 27 to age 36. He was one of the most dynamic outfielders in the game. Rookie of the Year, MVP in the same season. Of course, he was 27 years old at the time, but 10 All-Stars, MVP, Gold Glove, Rookie of the Year, 2 batting titles, 3 Silver Sluggers. Yeah, Ichiro should be 100% unanimously, and if it's not, strip the votes away of anyone who did not vote for Ichiro this year. Next up, I don't think he'll be unanimous, but this guy should be a one and done on the ballot. CC Sabathia. He is one of the greatest pitchers of, I don't even know what generation it is, but of my generation growing up, I'm like that mid 2000s, early 2010s. Like that's really where my baseball, you know, love for the game really started. And CC Sabathia was like maybe that dude during that time. Like, of course, you had Verlander and Scherzer, but CC on the New York Yankees, the big, stocky lefty, like CC was nasty. And you look at his career numbers, I think they're disgusting. This is the guy who's won a Cy Young. This is the guy who pitched in New York, was absolutely elite in Cleveland, elite in Milwaukee. I think CC was one of the dirtiest pitchers in his prime, a true workhorse kind of a guy too. Like you wanted CC in the biggest of games because you trusted him in those biggest moments, and he delivered for the Yankees a ton, and he also delivered for I guess Cleveland back in the day. He delivered maybe a little bit. I'm trying to look at the numbers again for Cleveland in the postseason. Maybe he didn't deliver for Cleveland, but definitely delivered for the Yankees, as he was the ALCS MVP in 2009 as they won the World Series that year, and he was very good in the World Series as well. So CC Sabathia definitely should be a one and done on the Hall of Fame ballot, because he should be going into the MLB Hall of Fame after just 1 year. But the rest of the guys, there are some guys who I think definitely should make it and some guys who I think are at least going to be close. King Felix now on the ballot. I think King Felix will eventually make it to the Hall of Fame as well. I don't think he's going to be a one and done, but two-time led the league in ERA, Cy Young Award winner. And I do think legitimately from like what, 2008 to like 2015, like an 8-year period where he felt like one of the premier pitchers in the sport. Because of that, I would put King Felix in the Hall of Fame. Baseball is a lot tougher than other sports, so I'm not saying it's a lock, but in my MLB Hall of Fame, I don't mind putting King Felix in there. I thought he was good enough for a long enough time. And if he was on a better team, I think he would have had some more special moments as well to just add to his Hall of Fame trajectory. Troy Tulowitzki, this is one of those guys where I think he has Hall of Fame talent. He even kind of has like the Hall of Fame numbers, but the issue is the games played are not there. Like the per game numbers are there. Career 290 average, career 856 OPS. Like you look year by year, the numbers are nasty, but the, the sample size just isn't large enough for me. Like done by the age of 31 years of age and didn't have a ton of seasons where he even played like 130 games. Like he only had like 3 or 4 years where he even played like 130 games in Major League Baseball. Troy Tulowitzki, I think, is one of those guys that was robbed of the Hall of Fame because of his body and health. Hall of Fame talent that I just think didn't play enough games. Ben Zobrist, he's on the ballot, like him a lot, but more of a super utility guy. Never thought of Ben Zobrist as a Hall of Famer, but he's one of those guys when you go back and look at the baseball reference, maybe a little bit better than you realize. Curtis Granderson, he's on the ballot. Actually, really, really love Curtis Granderson. Did his peak last long enough for him to be considered Hall of Fame worthy? I would probably lean no. I do think he had a very, very good peak, but I don't know if it was Hall of Fame worthy. What he did with the Tigers and the Yankees from like 26 to like early 30s, I thought was really good, but I think it was more all-star, star level than like superstar Hall of Fame level. So Curtis Granderson is a no for me, but I do think he should at least survive the first year on the ballot. I will give Curtis Granderson at least that respect. Hanley Ramirez, he's on the ballot. The career numbers, 289 average, 847 career OPS, maybe higher than you expect for Hanley Ramirez, but also just one of those guys where it felt like he was either playing like at an MVP level or he was playing like a pretty average major leaguer. I just don't think we ever got like a level of consistency from Hanley. And he was also a guy after like age 28, dealt with so many injuries, did not have a ton of healthy seasons, felt a little bit like a head case at times with some of these teams. Like I think Hanley was super talented, and I think there's another world where you replay Hanley Ramirez's career, and he is one of the best shortstops of the 2000s. He is a guaranteed Hall of Famer. I do think a couple things in his career went wrong where he probably actually didn't even live up to his potential despite having a really good major league career. So I think Hanley's one of those guys you do his career over again. He is a Hall of Famer, but I think in the current world we live in, I wouldn't give it to Hanley Ramirez. Russell Martin, he's on the list. Very good catcher. Respect him a lot. Very good power bat, too, for a catcher. You go look at the numbers. Was putting up 20 home runs at age 33 for Toronto, like year 12. But Russell Martin is not a Hall of Famer. I'm sorry. Brian McCann, he's on the ballot, too. At one point, maybe we all felt like Brian McCann was a Hall of Famer because those first few years until the age of 27, he was nasty, and the numbers he put up was insane. All-star year after year. I mean, the power numbers for Brian McCann, I mean, he was consistently like a 20 home run guy for like 8 straight years, but the bat just didn't seem to be the same by the time he hit age 28. Very respectable guy. I think one of those forgotten dudes when we go back and look at Major League history, like a 6-time Silver Slugger, like that might be enough with the 2017 World Series. Like that might be enough to put him in the Hall of Fame, but just for guys who are like done by the time they're age 28, age 29, like your peak has to be so high for me those first 7-8 years of your career if you're going to be done by the time you're 30 years of age. I don't think Brian McCann, I don't think it was high enough for me. So unfortunately, I don't think he's going to survive. I think he can survive past year 1, but I don't think past that. Then the final guy I want to discuss, Carlos Gonzalez, one of my favorite players in his prime, but probably a dude where I haven't looked at the splits too much, but he might be a dude that benefited a little bit from playing in Coors Field. I mean, I don't want to I think it's a little bit unfair at times when you put that on players who play in cores, but you look at the career numbers for Cargo, 319 average, 959 OPS when playing at home, 250 average, 724 OPS when playing on the road. Cargo, those first like 8 years of his career, the numbers are actually nasty, but I do think he's a guy that was helped a lot because he played in Coors Field, and I don't think he's actually maybe as good as what the numbers say, despite the numbers being very good. Carlos Gonzalez, I think, is one of those guys that mean more to me as a fan growing up than I think he should be as like a Hall of Famer historian of the game. And so, Carlos Gonzalez, unfortunately, you do not make it to my MLB Hall of Fame. But we'll discuss some veterans who have been trying for years to make it to the Hall of Fame, and we'll decide if I'll put them in mine in segment number 3. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And let's discuss the veterans on the ballot who have been trying to make it for years. And let's see if this is finally their year to make it, because we were talking about that reliever earlier when discussing Fernando Rodney, about how there's a reliever who's been on the ballot for 10 years who has a better case than Rodney, because he has like 100 more saves than Rodney, an ERA that's like a point and a half lower, an ERA plus that's like 70 points higher, a whip that's like zero point 0.4 lower, like numbers across the board better. And Billy Wagner, 73.8% last year, final year on the ballot. If Billy Wagner does not make it this year, he will not be on the MLB Hall of Fame ballot, sadly. And I I think Billy Wagner should be in. I mean, he's one of the greatest closers of all time. He's like top 3, top 4 in saves. I don't have it off the top of my head. And I think because he just barely missed it this past year, I think Billy Wagner, I think he will make it in 2025, because you need, I think, 75% of the vote. He was at 73.8% this past year. I think Billy Wagner would get it. But the next guy who finished second in percentage, Andrew Jones, entering his 8th year, I'm not sure if he will ever make it. And I do think Andrew Jones should be a Hall of Famer, but at this point, if he hasn't made it already with the numbers he has in his career, all those gold gloves, I'm not sure if Andrew Jones will ever make it. I think he'll be one of those guys that get like 73, 70% their final year of the ballot, and they just miss out. But maybe one day his son, Drew Jones, could be in the Hall of Fame for the Arizona Diamondbacks, of course. Carlos Beltran, he got 57% of the vote last year, year 3 on the ballot. I think Beltran will eventually be on the Hall of Fame. Will be in the Hall of Fame. You look at his numbers in his career, they're pretty nasty for Beltran. He's a career 837 OPS. And again, we look at the Hall of Fame ballot. If you want baseball references, they have this thing called War 7. It just takes the 7 best years of your war and it adds it together. A-Rod is number 1 on the list. Carlos Beltran, number 4 on the list. He's even ahead of guys like Ichiro Suzuki. So very interesting case for Carlos Beltran. Dustin Pedroia actually number 7 on this list if you wanted to make the case for Petey. But going back at the list and just looking at some more of the percentages, I mean, Beltran, yes, I think he'll eventually get in. I don't know about 2025, but I do think he's trending in the right direction. A-Rod, he's at 35%, entering 4th year on the ballot. Hall of Fame steroid user, Hall of Fame steroid user. I don't think he'll ever make it to the Hall of Fame. Same with the next guy, Manny Ramirez, who's been around 30%, entering 9th year. I love Manny, one of my favorite players of all time. Unfortunately, he will not go into the Hall of Fame. This next guy, I think will, maybe not this year, but eventually. Chase Utley, 28% last year, year 2 on the ballot. When you do the War 7, he is second behind A-Rod of all these balloters. And so I think Chase Utley actually has, I think he has a pretty high Q score. I feel like a lot of people love Chase Utley. I feel like he has a lot of respect, and I think he will actually get a lot more votes than people realize. And I think he will eventually make it to the Hall of Fame, because I feel like a lot of people have a claim for Chase Utley, and he was a very good major leaguer. I mean, defensively and really offensively, one of the most underrated middle infielders of the last 10 years. I mean, maybe or maybe not, he's underrated. I mean, for him, it's really about, again, the peak versus like longevity with Utley, because he actually does have the peak to justify being in the Hall of Fame. The question is, do you think the peak was long enough? Because his peak was probably like 4 or 5 years. Like his peak wasn't that long. That was a problem. He had a peak good enough, I think, to be in the Hall of Fame, but was it long enough? I think that's a question voters will have, and I think eventually Utley actually will get in because I think Chase Utley's kind of like a Tracy McGrady, where the prime was so little, but I think he had enough juice during the prime where he will actually make it to the Hall of Fame. So I think Chase Utley will. Omar Vizquel, 8th year on the ballot. I don't even need to give any thoughts. He should not be in the Hall of Fame. Bobby Abreu, he will not make it to the Hall of Fame. 15%, 6th year on the ballot. I love Bobby Abreu. I think Bobby Abreu should be a Hall of Famer. He's a 291 average. 870 career OPS. Go look at the numbers for Bobby Abreu. They are really, really strong. And I don't know why he doesn't get more love for the Hall of Fame. Like, you just stack his numbers against anybody, and he's right there. I think Bobby Abreu should be a Hall of Famer. This next guy, I'm also not against it, but growing up, I felt like he was a Hall of Famer, but when you look at the numbers now that we have all this advent of analytics and stats, he doesn't feel like a Hall of Famer. Jimmy Rollins, as a kid, I would have told you he's a lock for the Hall of Fame. Triple leader like every single year, MVP. Like, this was one of the studs in that Phillies lineup that felt like it was one of the best offenses for like a 4 or 5 year period. And Jimmy Rollins, when you go and look at the stats, it's just not as impressive as you would remember. A 743 career OPS, like way lower than I thought. Again, by the time he hit age 30, like no more seasons with at least an OPS of 800. Like, his ceiling actually wasn't as high as I remembered as a player. Maybe it's because of the speed that I thought he was good. And he did have some pop, but like, we look at the stats for Jimmy Rollins, it's weird because like the triples are there. He's got some pop, he's got some speed, but like the average in OPS isn't as high as like the traditional some of those counting stats would tell you. So for Jimmy Rollins, I don't know. He's a weird test case, I think, is right there on the line. But considering he was at 15% last year entering year 4, I don't think he'll make it. Andy Pettitte, 13.5% entering year 7 on the ballot. I don't think Andy Pettitte will make it. I think he was a very good pitcher, but I never thought Andy Pettitte was an elite pitcher. That's why he's got a career 3.85 ERA. He's got many seasons with an ERA north of 4 as he does below 4. Same with the next guy, Mark Burley. Yes, he was a workhorse, and that's like his saving grace, but he was also a guy that gave up a lot of hits and gave up a lot of contact, didn't strike out anyone. Yes, he didn't walk anybody, but he also didn't strike out anyone, did give up a ton of hits, and like his ERA was always between like a 3.8 and like a 4.3. Like, Mark Burley was definitely like a number 2 and number 3 starter in your rotation, but was he a Hall of Fame starter? Probably not. K-Rod entering year 3 on the ballot. Again, it's so hard for relievers to make it. Multiple seasons with at least 40 saves, multiple seasons with at least, he has like 7-8 seasons with at least like 35 saves, a career 2.86 ERA, like 437 career saves. Billy Wagner, again, has 422 career saves, so even more saves than Billy Wagner. And considering Wagner's on the last year of his deal and the last year of the ballot, it doesn't look like he might not make it. It's hard to say if K-Rod's going to make it. Again, it's so hard for relievers to make it, and I just don't know if he will. But I would vote for K-Rod because I would also vote for Billy Wagner. Torrey Hunter, he's on year 5, 7.3% last year. I mean, he might not even make it to year 10 of his eligibility. Torrey Hunter is kind of like Adam Jones to me, maybe a slightly higher ceiling, but just a guy who's very good for a very long time, but never a dude who I think is like a superstar player of the game. Maybe an all-star star, but superstar Hall of Fame player. I consider Torrey Hunter kind of like an Adam Jones. Very good, but not Hall of Fame. Then the last guy, David Wright. Year 2 on the ballot, 6% last year. David Wright, I think, should get more love than what he got this past year. What's the difference between David Wright and Chase Utley? To be honest, I kind of like David Wright's career numbers a little bit better than a Chase Utley. I think they're actually maybe slightly stronger. You can make the argument for either one, but Chase Utley, I think, gets a lot more love than David Wright. I just don't know if that should be accurate. So I want to see a little bit more love going David Wright's way because I'm not sure he'll be on the ballot too much longer. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Dose.